is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Spain and Germany warn of a shortage of COVID vaccinations as the EU pushes AstraZeneca to supply more doses.
Our other headlines in the UK, new vaccination centres open in a bid to get all vulnerable Brits their first jab by mid-February.
Wall Street under pressure as the battle between online investors and hedge funds heats up.
And roads, railways and airports in China unusually quiet as the government asks people not to travel for the spring holiday. The battle over vaccine supply is entering a new phase as the EU ramps up pressure on AstraZeneca to deliver. The pharmaceutical giant is under pressure to make up a shortfall of jabs using its factories in the UK. This is a row that threatens to interrupt the flow of other vaccines being made and exported from Europe. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Tony Waterman, who's following the story in Brussels. Tony, what's the latest?
Well, Jamie, we have new information on Europe's plans to introduce export controls on vaccines produced in the bloc. An EU official saying that they are going to introduce an authorization tool, meaning that any company looking to export COVID-19 jabs is going to have to get permission before doing so. They're going to have to fill out a form indicating when the jabs are going, where they're going, and how many of them are going. And then national governments, along with the Commission, will review this and make a decision on whether they stay or whether they go. And they could reject some of these, although some of them, this is not going to be a blanket ban. An EU official saying that it's very likely that some of these are in fact going to be rejected. This is not official yet, but it is expected to be adopted tomorrow, and of course comes against the backdrop of that very ugly clash with AstraZeneca over vaccine delivery delays. A third high-level phone call last night between the company and member states failed to resolve that issue. And, you know, we're not just talking about a couple of doses here and there. We're talking about tens of millions of doses which will not be delivered, and concerns in Europe that some of these doses, which they help to pay for the production of, have now gone elsewhere. So in Brussels' eyes, this is a mechanism, this authorization tool is all about transparency. But if they start banning the export, even one shipment of these vaccines going out, it's not likely to go down very well in other parts of the world.
What impact is all this having on the EU's vaccination programme, which has already been criticised for being too slow to get off the ground?
Well, listen, Jamie, if some of these vaccines are not allowed to leave Europe, then by default there is going to be more doses in circulation within the bloc. And perhaps this is something that Brussels doesn't want to admit publicly. It's not exactly a good look to be blocking the exports of coronavirus vaccines in the middle of a global pandemic. But behind closed doors, EU officials saying and making it very clear that this authorization tool is about making sure that these manufacturers are fulfilling their contractual obligations. But you are exactly right. Europe has been very slow off the block. It lags way behind the U.S. and the UK when it comes to immunization. And these shortages in supplies are only going to exacerbate the problem. The German health minister warning today of another 10 weeks of shortages. Of course, this gets compounded by the fact that Germany's vaccine committee today saying that the AstraZeneca shot should not be used in individuals above the age of 65 because there is insufficient data. And we're really seeing that these shortages are becoming a real problem, and they're playing out in real time in places like Spain, where my colleague Rahul Patik has filed this report from.
Spain will aim to have 70% of its population vaccinated by July. The words of Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez back in November. Fast forward to the end of January, and Spain's two biggest regions, Madrid and Catalonia, are now running short of vaccine doses. Delays in shipping from the EU's two approved vaccine providers, Pfizer and Moderna, are being blamed.
It's a problem having to start a vaccination campaign that requires 2 doses and then having to postpone it because of shortages or distribution problems. That is not to say that just having the first dose is totally useless, but ideally we would like to finish the vaccination process, to finish what we started.
Now, with Spain currently in the grip of the 3rd wave of the pandemic, this couldn't have come at a worse time. The latest figures from the country's health ministry reporting over 40,000 new infections over a 24-hour period and 492 deaths, figures not seen since April last year and the worst days of this crisis.
Being young as I am, it doesn't worry me that much, since I should be more immune or have less risk of dying. But for old people or people that have diseases like asthma, it's important that this program rolls out. The faster, the better.
I think they should be faster. This is something we all need. It's been a while already since they announced that vaccination was starting.
Madrid's regional governments say they will halt new vaccinations for the next 2 weeks and concentrate instead on giving second doses to those who have already had jabs. European Union guidelines state the second dose can be administered up to 45 days after the first shot. All this means a busy inbox for Spain's new health minister, Carolina Darias, who started her new job on Tuesday. Top of her agenda will be to ensure that Pfizer and Moderna can get their supplies up to speed as soon as possible. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Well, Pfizer is expected to have its deliveries back up to speed by the end of this week. As for AstraZeneca, the company now saying that it wants to work with Europe to make up for the shortfall. AstraZeneca jab, by the way, not even approved for use yet in Europe, although the drugs regulator is expected to greenlight that tomorrow.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the UK's vaccination drive continues to accelerate as pop-up clinics open across the country. Supermarkets, football stadiums, mosques and museums are now hosting inoculation sites. Our correspondent, Naweed Jabakil, is in London outside one of the new temporary centres. So, Naweed, how is the UK's vaccination campaign coming along?
Yeah, definitely ramping up, as you say, Paul. More than 32 mass vaccination centres opening across England this week alone. That includes places like supermarkets and mosques, but also pharmacies like this one you can see behind me. People queuing out throughout the day here. We spoke to the owner of this pharmacy who said things are going smoothly. He said he was worried given the headlines around vaccine shortages in recent days, but that so far things have been fairly smooth. Here they're administering the AstraZeneca vaccine that we've just been hearing about, the concerns across Europe, but in England, in the UK at least, the government's being provided with 2 million of those jabs every single week, so no cause for concern in terms of shortages here. We've also been speaking to some of those people who've come and got those vaccinations, over 80s at the moment. Those aged over 80 have been able to get the jabs, and really the sense from most of them was a sense of relief, or from their children as well, saying that they were happy that their grandparents or parents can now be able to get on with their lives and go back out in society. In terms of where this goes from here, I think the big change we're seeing is the ramping up of this vaccination program. It's becoming more informal. It's gone from hospitals and GP centres in recent weeks to places like this, places like mosques and football stadiums, becoming a bit more informal as the UK looks to hit that target of giving 15 million people their first dose of the jab by the middle of February. Paul.
And elsewhere, Naweed, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is in Scotland. How's that being received?
Yeah, an interesting trip. He's travelled from here in London 600 miles to go to Scotland, in Glasgow. A trip that's been roundly criticised, particularly by the Scottish National Party, the governing party in Scotland. The First Minister there saying that it was non-essential, that Boris Johnson didn't need to go there. On the other hand, his office, we've heard from, say that this was a trip really to go and look at the frontline workers fighting the virus all across the UK, not just here in England. And that's what this is about for Boris Johnson. It's about the optics as well of being seen being the leader of the United Kingdom. That's why he's gone on this visit. But he also says, his office also says that it's about really showing that the Prime Minister is getting serious about tackling the virus in all parts of this country. Remember the 100,000 deaths mark passed earlier this week. And for Boris Johnson, at least, despite the criticism that he's faced with this trip up to Scotland, it's a one-day visit. He will be back in London tomorrow. For him, it's really about being seen to be in charge and doing all he can, and his government doing all they can to try and beat this virus.
OK, Norwegia Barkill reporting live from London. Thank you.
Well, Boris Johnson faces continued pressure over the UK's soaring coronavirus death rate, which passed 100,000 this week. The Prime Minister said he was deeply sorry for every life that has been lost. But there's anger among some victims' families over the government's handling of the pandemic. Our correspondent Nicole Johnston has been to meet one man who says he wants justice.
These are the names of some of the victims of COVID-19 in the UK, and their relatives don't want them forgotten. The families of over 500 victims have formed a group called Names Not Numbers.
Of course we can't bring these people back, but what we're doing through our protests, through setting up memorials outside Number 10, outside Parliament, is fighting for their memory and the justice of those who have died.
Ellis Tustin lost his 88-year-old grandfather, Beres Moore, to COVID-19 in April last year. He was living in a care home and was transferred to hospital with an infection. There he died from the disease.
You're a disgrace to the nation!
Here Ellis is protesting outside Parliament House last year, calling for an inquiry into the government's handling of COVID-19.
A vast majority of these deaths that have happened in the UK are quite simply down to government negligence and lack of action, and we think someone's got to stand up and do something about that.
More than 100,000 people have now died from COVID-19 across the UK. At the start of the pandemic, the government's chief scientific advisor said a death toll of 20,000 would be a good outcome. But now the UK has among the highest mortality rates in the world, far from the good outcome the government hoped for.
I think to understand how bad that 100,000 is, you have to have a look at other, island nations. South Korea, politically in all intensive terms, is an island, 1,400, just under that. Japan, about 4,800, and New Zealand, 25 people. Now, if you look at Britain as it has always historically been, as a fortress, essentially our leaders just let the doors open. And when you compare it to other urbanised societies, you can see how badly our country has behaved.
Some British hospitals are being compared to war zones. Almost 40,000 patients are now being treated. And while infection rates are starting to come down, the death rates and pressure on the National Health Service is expected to continue to grow for weeks to come.
In this country we have a culture that, when people die and when you have grief, you kind of accept it and you deal with it, and you deal with it in your own way. And this is not a time for something like that to happen. The deaths of 100,000 people, and more will come, is simply down to the government neglect that has happened, and it's down to their whole culture as a government. They put the economy before the lives of someone that you have lost.
Ellis Tustin says in the future the group will organise marches and a National Day of Remembrance. And to those feeling isolated and alone right now, he promises their loved ones will be honoured in the right way. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Well, experts from the World Health Organization have completed their quarantine in Wuhan, China, 2 weeks after arriving. The team is researching the origins of coronavirus and began preparations during quarantine. China's foreign ministry says the experts will conduct interviews and discussions while complying with China's pandemic prevention measures. The team is due to remain in China for more than 2 weeks.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, will hard borders return to the EU? Germany is expected to tighten its controls amid fears about new COVID variants.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. we bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Hi there, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The US economy shrank by 3.5% last year, its worst year since 1946. But markets appear to be shrugging off the bleak outlook, with the quarterly earnings season in full swing, and all eyes are on America's big tech. Our correspondent John Terrett is live in New York, so John, talk us through these earnings.
Hi. Well, they are quite remarkable, very significant indeed. Let's take Apple, for example, which gave us its earnings within the last 12 hours or so. Now, Apple has just had its first $100 billion quarter. That is to say, 100 with a great big B. And it's done it because of sales of the iPhone, particularly the iPhone 12. And I think there was around 80 million units shipped in just 3 months. But the share price now is down 1.6%. Why? Because people worry that Apple won't be able to repeat that. Facebook also gave us its earnings within the last 12 hours. At the moment, the shares are up 0.5%. And basically, advertising at Facebook really rebounded as we all sat there at home talking to our friends via Facebook and via Insta, as we rather trendier people like to call it. Also, the man in charge of the company has said that he doesn't think he's going to have any more politics or infighting on the website in the future. As far as he's concerned, he's done with politics. Mark Zuckerberg, of course, that is. They did suggest headwinds in 2021, though, which is why when the news came out, the stock was down around 5%, but it's up 0.5% now. Tesla shares down 3% today. They've had their first full profitable year, and it's the 5th quarter in a row that they have been profitable. A bit disappointing the first time out as a blue chip, though, on the S&P 500. The earnings per share was a miss. The revenue was okay. Of course, that whole company hangs on Elon Musk's shoulders. He's talking about 50% annual growth in 2021 into 2022. And Microsoft, which actually gave us their earnings on Tuesday, shares up 2.2% at the moment. It's all thanks to Azure, the company that is the cloud element of Microsoft. Also the Xbox. We've all been gaming during the pandemic, and people have been updating their PCs as they sit at home doing their work and texting their friends and so on. So what does this mean? It all means that our digital future has just all moved a step closer than we thought it would be about 12 months ago. Jamie and Paul?
Yeah, you've been far too busy, John, to stay at home gaming throughout the pandemic. Another big name on Wall Street this week. Tell us about Gamestop. Everyone's talking about this.
Everyone is talking about everyone. This is the big story of the day here. Now, let me tell you about Gamestop. It's basically a knackered mall store, essentially, a store in, what we call them in the UK, shopping centres. And they sell video games. Now, already the alarm bells should be ringing because nobody goes to a store to buy video games, do they, these days? It's all downloaded online and on your phone. Now, the company appointed to the board someone who's seen as a bit of a business guru. He's the co-founder of the company called Chewy, which is a website for selling you all the things that you need for your pet. And a hedge fund went out and said, we think this company's stock is going to go down and we're going to short sell against it. Well, because there's no sporting, there's no gambling, a lot of people have been turning to buying and selling stocks as day traders online via websites like Reddit, for example, where there is a big discussion board about what you should and shouldn't do and buy and sell and that sort of thing. And they said, no, we are going to disagree with Wall Street. They may want to drive down the price. We're going to buy it. So the share price went from $4 to $400, although it's $200 at this minute. And this is a popular result. The peasants are revolting. I think we knew that. David versus Goliath. Working class versus the elite. It really is. And to explain short selling in just a sentence, basically, I say to my friend, can I borrow your stock? He says, yes, I take control of it. I sell it along with others. The price goes down. When the price goes down, I use my own money to buy the stock, all the time hoping the price will go back up. When it does go back up, I sell the stock, give the money back to my friend, and pocket the difference. That is short selling. Now, the problem with this is that now there's so much media talk about this. Restrictions are being implied. Robinhood is one of these sites where they go to buy and sell stocks. They're already stopping people from buying stocks like this one, Gamestop, AMC, BlackBerry, and some of the airlines as well. I think there could well be some regulation introduced from the leading regulator, the SEC. And one political note, which I do think is important. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who's a very young New York congresswoman, very influential in the Democratic Party, says, look, Wall Street has been using stocks and shares, particularly hedge funds, as their own piggy banks for years. And what's happening now is that the ordinary man or woman on the street is getting their own back and doing exactly the same thing. Payback time.
Fascinating. John, thanks so much. John Terrace in New York.
Well, as John mentioned, thousands of amateur investors have poured into the video retailer's stock, forcing Wall Street to take billions of dollars in losses. It's also created a ripple effect with online traders looking to replicate GameStop's rise in other companies. Shares in GameStop have now risen more than 700% since last week. Its selling price at the start of the month was around $20, but that has now since reached well over 300. The small-time traders are also focusing on other companies heavily shorted by hedge funds, including Nokia, which saw shares jump briefly around 60% on Wednesday. And BlackBerry is another stock finding support online from individual investors. Shares have climbed around 30% this week. And the company says it's not aware of any developments or change in its business that would account for this recent jump. Well, let's talk to Santosh Rao, who's head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners, who hopefully can make some sense of all of this. What do you think's going on? Have retail investors been underestimated for too long in terms of their market moving ability?
Absolutely. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I think this is sensational. You see all the media hype and media, it's playing well in the media, so to speak. But when you step back a little bit, shorting has been an essential part of investments for a long time, and you need it. It's a good strategy. It keeps the market honest, keeps the investors honest. So that's all good. So in this case, there was a technical factor where 140% of the shares of GameStop, the outstanding shares of GameStop, were shorted. So more shares were shorted than what's available. So I think investors, smart investors, took advantage of that. Normally in the past, it was the sophisticated hedge fund and institutional investors who did that. But in this case, it was the small guy, the retail cohort, which is a rising force in the investment population. They have new technology. He or she is much smarter than before, and they can group together. They can talk together. In the past, it was just one retail guy sitting at home doing it. Now it's a full group. And before you know it, it's a huge force. They can really move the market, which we saw in this case. So it doesn't happen all the time in this, such as this, 140% of the shares shorted. But I think shorting is essential. So at a technical level, this is nothing uncommon, nothing illegal, goes on for a long time, has been going on for a long time. But I think in this case, there was a socio-economic twist to it. It was this small guy. It was a sense that the retail investor has been shut out of this whole thing, the whole party, the fear of missing out. They all want to be part of it, and they can be now with the fractional trading technology and the whole thing, so they can participate equally forcefully as the institutional guys. And that's what's happening. That's the changing dynamic. So they are a big force, and they are coming strong.
Okay, well, that's what's already happened. Here's the difficult question and the more difficult answer. What happens next?
Yeah, so I think what's going to happen next, of course, the regulations need to be tightened a little bit. They're not going to stop shorting, but I think it's going to be more rational. When an investor comes in to short the stock, he's going to look at what's going on. Is it reasonable? Is it really detached from the fundamentals? And he's going to take a short position. He's going to hedge his position or whatever the reason for shorting, he's going to do that. So I think what's going to happen now is people are going to be more careful. It's not just going to be easy just because the stock's mispriced in terms of valuation, you just go out and do it. I think you're going to study it much more carefully. I think that's what's going to happen. the retail investor is going to be around. They are also going to participate in that. So now I think everyone's going to be more cognizant of the competition, of the players in the room, and the regulations on the edges will be tightened, will be watched. The margin requirements and all that will be tightened. So I think things like that. So I think in the end, it's going to be net positive for the market. In the meantime, there are going to be plenty of millionaires, and there are a lot of people who are going to lose money.
Santosh, good to see you. Thanks very much for talking to us. Santosh Rao there.
Thank you.
Beverage group Diageo has reported an unexpected rise in sales, driven in part by a tequila surge in the United States. The firm's shares are up by 4% as more people enjoy a tipple at home in lockdown. Alcoholic drinks makers have been hit by the pandemic, with bars, restaurants and nightclubs closed, but retail sales have helped counter those losses. Swatch has ticked up its first loss in nearly 4 decades. The Swiss watch firm suffered a net loss of nearly $60 million as sales plummeted more than 32% during the pandemic. The company also closed 384 of its stores last year as spending on luxury goods fell. Chinese ride-hailing giant Didi Chuxing says it's raised $300 million for its autonomous driving unit. Investment firm IDG Capital led the funding, while the Russia-China Investment Fund is also putting money into the project. Some of the companies also recently invested in Didi's freight unit. And Toyota overtook Volkswagen Group to become the world's top-selling car maker in 2020. A slump in demand caused by the pandemic hit VW harder and sees Toyota take the top spot for the first time in 5 years. Both companies say sales fall, but Toyota's 2020 group sales fell 11% to 9.5 million units, while VW's global deliveries declined by 15%.
Germany is preparing entry bans for travellers from Britain, Portugal, Brazil and South Africa countries to limit the spread of new COVID-19 variants. New measures to tighten border controls have been on the table for some weeks, but the country's interior minister suggested it could now happen soon. Ryan Thompson reports.
Well, a near-complete travel shutdown looks imminent here in Germany, and we could see planes grounded and land borders tightened as early as next week. The idea is to prevent foreign COVID-19 mutations from arriving on German soil, but of course there are already dozens of cases involving those strains here. Chancellor Angela Merkel has pressed for these kinds of measures for weeks now, and on Thursday morning her interior minister met with European counterparts to discuss the move. Horst Seehofer told reporters that Germany is unsatisfied with the EU's essential travel-only policy, which has kept borders open without many concrete controls in place. Seehofer said a national policy was being prepared, potentially reflecting what we've heard, which would include very, very few flights coming in and going, and it could be in place very soon.
My view is that an entry from areas with variations should not take place for the protection of our own people. We ask a lot of our own citizens with the everyday restrictions, and it would be difficult to explain to them to have severe restrictions like the closure of schools and nurseries, and at the same time not take the necessary precautions to prevent the entry of a highly infectious virus from abroad.
And Germany already has a partial entry ban in place for travelers coming from Great Britain, Ireland, Portugal, South Africa and Brazil. They say that a final decision on what these measures will actually entail is due on Friday morning, but they will apply to air borders as well as the 9 land borders. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
You're watching CGTN still ahead. Some unwanted surprises for UK businesses who say the Brexit trade deal might not be all it's cracked up to be.
The allocation of tiers will be reviewed every 14 days, starting on the 16th of December.
And it will see some parts of the country move into even tougher limits on their lives than before the current lockdown. That's unlikely to go down well with some local leaders.
Since the beginning of November, admissions to intensive care units across Italy have almost doubled.
The UK government is well invested with 100 million doses pre-ordered as and when the vaccine becomes ready.
And of the disruption being caused by COVID-19, Germany's famous Christmas markets have all but been cancelled.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Well, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jeremy Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories again. Spain and Germany have warned of a shortage of COVID vaccinations as the EU pushes AstraZeneca to supply more doses.
Our other headlines, new vaccination centres have opened in the UK in a bid to get all vulnerable Brits their first jab by mid-February.
And pressure grows in Wall Street as the battle between online investors and hedge funds heats up.
At the World Economic Forum, Davos 2021, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has promised to produce many more vaccines to help the global fight against coronavirus. The country's regulator has so far approved only 2, Covishield and Covaxin. Our correspondent Juliet Mann is here and has been following the virtual event. Juliet.
Yes, I have. Thanks, Jamie. Well, India has launched the world's largest vaccination programme. In just 12 days, more than 12.3 million health workers have been given the jab. And in coming months, the Prime Minister says the country will meet its target to vaccinate 300 million senior citizens. Now, along with trying to protect a population of 1.3 billion people, Modi says efforts are also being made to help others.
By sending COVID vaccines to various countries and setting up infrastructure related to vaccination, India is saving the lives of the citizens of other countries also. And all at the WEF will be believed to know that while so far only 2 made in India corona vaccines have been introduced to the world, in the near future many more such vaccines will be made available from India. These vaccines will help us in assisting countries across the world faster and on a much bigger scale.
The King of Jordan has also been talking about vaccines. He says the world has a moral duty to ensure that poor countries are not left at the end of the queue and that safeguarding the health and well-being of refugees is imperative.
As the second highest number of refugees per capita globally, Jordan continues to protect refugees in its pandemic response. And we are among the first countries in the world to start vaccinating refugees for free. But international support is also essential. We must collectively work to develop new policy tools to help us address the problems of today and tomorrow.
So vaccinating the world very much front and centre. But day 4 of Davos really focused on the 4th industrial revolution, technology. Now, more than 50% of the world's population is now online, and 2/3 of us own a mobile device. Coronavirus has really accelerated digitisation, with many now relying on technology to work from home or to access health and education services. The World Economic Forum says digital skills will be core to the jobs of the future. But COVID has also exposed a digital divide. A WEF report found that just 10% of households in low-income countries are fixed broadband subscribers. Now compare that to 70% in middle income and close to 90% in high-income countries. So all it did was outline a target of 75% for broadband access globally by 2025, ensuring that it costs no more than 2% of earnings. But the 20 billion or so connected devices on the planet are vulnerable to cybercrime. Cyber attacks were on the rise even before the pandemic. I mean, a cost from 2017 is $600 billion around the world. And now companies rank cybercrime as the third most concerning COVID risk. Private sector data shows a 350% surge in phishing websites, and that's since the start of 2020. Now, when you hear the words artificial intelligence, I bet you think about robots, right? But the term covers a broad range of computer science, precision medicine, autonomous vehicles and drones. Those are all really fast-growing markets. And AI alone is expected to boost global growth by as much as 14% by 2030. The Deputy Chairman of Huawei Technologies has been speaking about how it can aid health.
With the AI support, now the doctors can build the CT scan in a much faster way. Before, an experienced doctor spent around 12 minutes to review a single CT scan, but now it takes just 2 minutes. So you can see that from 12 minutes to 2 minutes, this is a big saving on time. But for me, it is not just the saving on time, it's the saving of life. Because during the pandemic, AI will help us to, will help the doctors to spend more time on the patient.
And there's been lots of debate too around digital currencies. The market's been seeing a lot of volatility in the past month in particular, but with Wall Street giants, central banks and big tech companies considering their own digital assets, it might not be long before people start using crypto as a preferred method of payment. Now, China has been the front runner in the drive to create a bespoke digital currency, but there are legal, regulatory and operational challenges across territories. Sara Pantuliano is the Chief Executive of the Overseas Development Institute. Thanks ever so much for joining us. So what is it about the current financial system that you think doesn't really work?
There are many things that don't work, but there is one thing that concerns me in particular. It is very limiting for some of the poorest people in the poorest countries have a real problem in accessing financial services, in having access to credit or access even to banking, and even those who bank are often underbanked and don't get access to loans and other financial services. So there is a real problem of financial exclusion that I think digital currencies can help address. And there is a problem of cost because the fiat currencies are actually, really, the fiat currency system is very expensive, both for the financial services in terms of the logistics of, moving cash, but also for the consumers, particularly in remote rural areas. You need to access a bank, you need to access a brick and mortar sort of a building somewhere that will, sort of impact on your ability to bank, to have access, to financial services. So I think there is great potential in digital services, in digital currencies to offer a faster, cheaper services to help create a credit history for people, to give them a financial identity for those who don't have it.
So what about collaborating across borders? Now we know that China is the front runner in this drive to create a digital currency. It's a long way off, but where could the benefits come from?
Well, this is a space that's been very much, developed, created, innovated by the private sector. So the central banks are, very much playing catch-up. But it's also true that we see the central banks of middle and low-income countries being particularly keen to advance, progress for two reasons. One, because of financial inclusion, as I was saying, for some that is an issue at the country level, like in the Marshall Islands. They are at the risk of sort of losing any access to financial services because the only bank that is present in the country is finding that too expensive. So, they are creating this Marshallese sovereign sort of a central bank digital currency built on blockchain technology to make sure that they continue to provide financial services to its citizens. But there is an issue also of breaking the hegemony of stable coins, of particularly of the US dollars. So there is an element of competition there that we're seeing very much discussed. It's a political issue, it's not just technological.
Increase in interest and the speed at which it's happening in digital currencies change that?
Yeah, that is the potential, very much so. The issue is how the regulation is brought forward, what kind of regulation we're going to see. There is undoubtedly the need for a level of regulation. You were in the program talking about issues around, cybersecurity. Obviously, there are issues around, privacy data, around potential illicit transfers. So it is a space that needs an element of regulation. But regulation will have to be creative. We'll have to, make sure that harnesses the potential of this technology and doesn't close the space for financial inclusion, which is really what this technology can offer, this innovation can offer. So it's just not using the banking regulations that we have in place. Otherwise, of course, it will not change very much.
So creative regulation is what we need. Well, Sara Pantiliano, thank you very much. Well, rebuilding the world after the pandemic has been discussed very much this week, but has the construction industry been slow to take advantage of technological advances? Angelica Donati is the CEO of Donati Immobiliare Group, which specialises in building, development and construction. And I asked her what the fourth industrial revolution means to her.
It's innovation and digitalization across the board, across sectors. I work in the construction industry, so for us, it's a big leap forward if we manage to implement it, because as you will know, construction is one of the least technological industries globally. Over the past 50 years, it's been one of the industries across the world which has invested least in R&D, and that has also shown up in very low growth figures. So I hope that this will be the right time to kickstart change and innovate in our sector.
Well, your business took part in building a university campus. So how does digital innovation play a part in projects like that?
It can play a huge role. Obviously, when we talk about tech and innovation in the construction space, we're not talking about replacing workers with robots or anything like that anytime soon, if not ever. But we can talk about using digital processes to make the construction management aspect of things more effective, more efficient, and obviously the long-term ultimate goal is to try and industrialize the process, to invest in prefabrication and modularization, to try and standardize something which has historically always been extremely bespoke, to make it more repeatable, and by making it more repeatable, make it faster and more efficient.
A big focus of Davos agenda has been looking beyond the pandemic, once we've moved through it, and maybe resetting business models, building back better. So where would you start?
There's only one place to start, which is also where we want to end up, which is with being more sustainable in our business practices. It's a sadly known fact that buildings and construction make up almost 40% of CO2 emissions globally. We know that urban populations are rising. We expect there to be a mass migration into cities despite COVID. I don't think that will change. And as we build more and more, as our urban environment becomes denser and denser, we cannot not think about sustainability and about conservation.
You talk about the construction industry having a massive role to play in building back better, but there's the pace of digital innovation and technology is getting faster and faster. Is it moving too fast, or can you keep up the pace?
I don't think it's ever too fast, especially not for sectors such as construction, but also real estate, which historically were not very innovative. I think the coronavirus pandemic has given these industries the boost they needed to change the way they did things, because as we know, when you're making money hand over fist, as real estate did for decades, there isn't much incentive to change. But now, when faced with new problems, these industries are having to find new solutions, and as long as these solutions help them be more effective, more sustainable, and serve their customers better, then it's never fast enough.
You know what, it's been a week of big ideas from big names at the virtual Davos agenda, and on the final day we'll be looking at trade and geopolitics and hear from Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. Jamie.
Juliet, thank you very much. A Russian court has ruled that the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny must remain in jail, rejecting an appeal against his sentence. The opposition figure accused the Kremlin of wanting to silence his supporters. Navalny was given a 30-day prison term for alleged parole violations after returning to Russia from Germany 10 days ago. Last summer, he was poisoned with the nerve agent Novichok, an attack he blames on the Russian government, which the Kremlin has denied. A court in Germany has jailed a far-right sympathiser for life for murdering a prominent pro-migrant politician in 2019. Walter Lübcke was shot in the head in his garden. Stefan Ernst admitted carrying out the shooting, the first far-right political assassination in post-war Germany. Ernst was said to be motivated by racism. US President Joe Biden has warned that the climate crisis poses an existential threat to the world. He's announced a raft of measures, including halting fossil fuel activity on public land. President Biden also wants to transform the government's vast fleet of cars and trucks to use electric vehicles.
Pakistan's highest court has ordered the release of Ahmed Omar Said Sheikh, convicted for the 2002 beheading of American journalist Daniel Pearl. An appeal against his release has been dismissed, but other appeals against his acquittal are still being heard. Our correspondent Dal Khan reports.
The short order of the Supreme Court was issued by a three-judge bench. One member of the bench opposed the decision. Sheikh's counsel says the court has come out to say that there is no offence that he has committed in this case, adding that the court had ordered that three others who had been sentenced to life in prison for their part in Pearl's kidnapping and death also be freed. Sheikh, after 18 years of denial, told the Supreme Court that he played a minor role in the killing. Daniel Pearl was doing research on religious extremism in Karachi when he was abducted in January 2002. Sheikh was arrested the same year and sentenced to death by a trial court. In its April 2, 2020 order, the Sindh High Court overturned the conviction of Umar Sheikh for killing Daniel Pearl, but maintained his conviction on a lesser charge of abetting the kidnapping, for which he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Since Sheikh had been incarcerated since 2002, that sentence was counted as time served by the High Court. Meanwhile, Pearl's family, in a statement released by their lawyer, said that today's decision is a complete travesty of justice, and the release of these killers puts in danger journalists everywhere as well as the people of Pakistan. The Pearl family lawyer says the only legal avenue following the court's decision upholding Sheikh's acquittal would be to ask for a review of the court decision. As the review would be conducted by the same court that upheld the appeal, he said, in practical terms, there is no further legal avenue to pursue in Pakistan. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Islamabad.
The UK has been out of the European single market for 4 weeks now. Negotiations on a post-Brexit trade deal went right to the wire. The outcome was met with some relief, avoiding the very real prospect of no deal. But 1 month in, businesses are finding out that zero tariffs does not mean zero taxes. Andrew Wilson explains.
Trickers have been making luxury shoes in the East Midlands since 1829, surviving world wars, stock market crashes, and now a pandemic. But Brexit is a new challenge. For their many EU clients, the trade deal may mean no tariffs, but tax is another matter. Luxury shoes last a lifetime, but they need maintenance, and simple repair jobs from EU clients are getting expensive.
We are having VAT applied, which is ridiculous because the customer owns those shoes. We've had, I think, at least 5 or 6 repairs back in the last week where the average charge from the carrier is about £90, which means that our customer in Europe, instead of paying £150, will be paying nearer £250.
The trade deal got Brexit over the finish line, but clearly needs more work. Trade advisors point out that leaving the single market was never going to be easy or straightforward.
What we have with the EU-UK Free Trade Agreement is a template for a very standard free trade agreement, like a free trade agreement that we have with Canada or with Mexico. So we're departing from a very high point with free movement of persons, free movement of goods and services to a situation which is much more restrictive, but one which is not unexpected.
And there are barriers for exporters too. This cheesemaker in Derbyshire is ready to keep supplying its European customers, but can't unless the costly new layers of red tape are resolved.
For instance, this one wedge of cheese to a consumer requires exactly the same health certificate to be issued as £180 each, as would a pallet of these cheese going over as a wholesale shipment.
The Brexit shock is reverberating. Under EU rules, this eel farm in Northern Ireland can't supply its London customers anymore. 20% of its market gone overnight. British businesses are learning the hard way about how free trade operates outside the old club. And so far it's proving an uncomfortable ride, but one the experts insist should have come as no surprise. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN still ahead. Roads and railways are emptier as millions of Chinese people stay put during the Spring Festival holiday.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Back to our top story, the vaccine rollout in Europe. And while the vaccine delivery row between the European Union and AstraZeneca continues, Hungarians say they're not prepared to wait. They've bypassed the EU to secure independent vaccine deals with the UK, Russia and China. Mia Alberti reports.
Hungary is marching to the beat of its own drum when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine. The country is breaking away from the EU's vaccination plan and looking east for alternatives, with success. Hungary has already bought 2 million doses of Russia's Sputnik vaccine, expected to arrive by the end of the month. Some officials say going around the EU was a matter of life or death.
By now, no one in Europe doubts that Brussels' actions failed to procure vaccines centrally. And as we are talking about human lives here, we have to speed up the availability of the jabs. Hungary has approved the use of the Russian vaccine, so Hungary can get into a better position as we can get vaccines not only from the EU, but from other sources as well.
Hungary is also in talks with Beijing to buy the Sinopharm vaccine, and according to the government, has already independently approved the British AstraZeneca jab for emergency use. The EU told us that AstraZeneca cannot independently distribute its vaccine to any member state as part of its centralized deal with the bloc, meaning Hungary will have to wait for Europe to approve the jab after all. But officials here in Hungary wonder what's taking so long, since the vaccine is already in use in other countries such as the UK or the US.
Hungarians don't need an explanation, we need vaccines. It can't happen that Hungarian people die because the EU's procurement is slow.
Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said Hungary could be vaccinating 500,000 people per day. But health experts say the country does not have the capacity to do so.
Hungary was never good in organization issues. The Hungarian government is very good in purchasing. No matter what cost. So again, the question was, can Hungary then vaccinate 500,000 people a day or on a weekend? In one hand, my answer is basically not likely.
The European Medicines Agency is expected to present its ruling on the AstraZeneca jab as soon as Friday. If approved, Hungary could be again the first country to start vaccination ahead of its fellow European member states. Mia Alberti, CGTN, in Budapest.
The Spring Festival travel rush has started in China. It's the biggest human migration on Earth, the most important holiday in the calendar. But with the pandemic still casting a huge shadow, many are just staying at home. Chinese roads and railways could be quieter than for years. Authorities expect around 1.1 billion passenger trips between the 28th of January and the 8th of March. Now that sounds like a lot of people, but that's 20% down on last year when coronavirus first struck, and over 60% lower than the pre-pandemic numbers. That's partly because the government has stepped up restrictions following small COVID outbreaks. The general message is do not travel unless it's absolutely necessary. Many people travel hundreds of miles across China to work, and Spring Festival is often the only time of year they get to see their families. But many migrant workers are heeding the government's call to stay put. Some employers are offering financial incentives to stay and work through the holiday. Li Jianhua reports.
There is around 2 weeks to go before the Lunar New Year, a time when most Chinese people return home to reunite with their families. But this year, the pandemic is likely to force many to stay put where they work. This year, nearly half of the migrant workers in Daishan, an island city in East China, are opting to stay put for the Lunar New Year. But this year has been tough, not least of all financially, and some admit they're only working during the important national holiday because they need to make more money.
Of course I miss my home and I want to go back. We had several meetings telling us about the government's new policies about returning home this year. They're encouraging us to stay. You know, I had a family to raise.
It is not only Chinese people who are staying put. Tan Tianhui is from Singapore, where the Spring Festival is also observed, and he can't reunite with his family either.
I celebrated Chinese New Year with my families every year since I was young, and even when I started working in China, I used to go back. So for myself, because of the hectic schedule of the projects, I will personally stay back this time to work on the projects.
The company now has about 4,000 workers, and the manager hopes more will stay to make sure the project is completed on time.
First, the project has a strict deadline, and we are not allowed to postpone its completion. Second, as we all know, the pandemic is complicating the situation, so if we don't keep the numbers here, we may not have enough workforce after the new year if anything happens.
Nucleic acid test results are needed to move around during the holiday, and in some places quarantine is required. With the government providing incentives to stay put, many are staying where they work for this year. Regardless, celebrating the Lunar New Year without family is unconventional by the Chinese standards. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Daishan, Zhejiang Province.
Well, finally, if you're looking for a new job this new year, this could be it for you. Conservationists in England are on the hunt for rangers to look after European bison. Hundreds have already applied for the 2 jobs in Kent, where the animals are being reintroduced 15,000 years after they last roamed Britain. The bison will help to manage woodland with their ability to clear trees, creating space for other species to thrive.
The headlines again. Spain and Germany are warning of a shortage of COVID vaccinations as the EU pushes AstraZeneca to supply more doses.
And that is Global Business. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, or search for CGTN in your app store and follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
Up next on CGTN Africa Live, but we'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all the team in London. Bye-bye.